Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Balabha Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Srimad His Divine Grace Easy Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaur Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I'm going to read this morning from Canto 3, Chapter 32, the final verses of the chapter, starting with text 41. This is a grand summary section of 8 chapters of very important and very famous instructions of Kapila Dev to Devahuti, incarnation of the personality of Godhead, who has given many teachings, many principles of the bhakti process, without reviewing them all. The Sankhya system, Dhyan system, a life of devotion that flows from fixing one's mind through meditation upon the personality of Godhead and living one's life in a life of devotion, and the contrasting position of those that do not, the life of fruitive activities from beginning to end, literally, preconception, conception, within the womb, after taking birth, living one's life, and then the next birth, and then the next birth. Very, very detailed description, summarizing the principles of devotion that's mixed and devotion that's unmixed. Very, very comprehensive. Not different from the message of Bhagavad Gita, just very, very comprehensive. And now he's summarizing just the previous set of verses. I have now described to you, Devahuti, my dear mother, the process of bhakti in 4-fold divisions, he says. So that's bhakti mixed with ignorance, bhakti mixed with passion, bhakti mixed with goodness, and bhakti that's unmixed. I've described to you the means of achieving that bhakti that's unmixed. And these teachings take one to the perfection of the soul's existence. And then he goes through a little description that says, persons that have the following doshas or faults won't be able to understand it. And he says it in language sometimes they shouldn't be told. Confidential things should not be told to persons who will not understand it or misuse it or offend the teaching and the teacher and the Supreme Lord. But more emphasis, particularly in Prabhupada's purports, is they should not be instructed. Yet, as Krishna says similar things, Prabhupada's comment in Bhagavad Gita is, devotees do it anyways. Basically, understanding the desire of the Supreme Lord, of course, there must be discrimination as to which things you say to which audiences, but out of compassion to help them understand the purpose of life. Certainly, the whole of the Bhagavatam, and in turn the teachings of our disciplic succession following Chaitanya Mahaprabhu want to give people a clear understanding of the goal of life. Na te vidu swartakatim vishnum. People do not know the swa arta gatim. They don't know the goal of life. So if you can't tell them, how are they going to know? You have to tell them. So emphasis is more upon they won't be able to understand. But nonetheless, so the introduction, naturally, is the holy name. Of course, people can offend the holy name and make some interpretation of the holy name and so forth. But there must be some means of purification. That's transcendental sound vibration. So now the concluding verses, which is what we're reading this morning, this should be told or instructed to persons that have the following qualifications. That means they will be able to understand it, or progressively as these qualities develop. Progressively understanding will increase. As we've experienced in our own practice of Krishna consciousness, what we understood in day one is not what we understood after 1 year, after 5 years, after some number of years. Those who sincerely and carefully follow, understanding increases because consciousness becomes less covered. So the realization is gradual and progressive, like Prabhupada's example, the rising of the sun. Darkness, twilight, rising of the sun, morning sun, midday sun. Illumination is progressive. Realization, similarly, of ourselves, God, and our relationship with Him is progressive. And the starting point of the entire bhakti process is association with sound vibration, which means association with saintly persons, sadhu sangha, because sadhus make spiritual sound vibrations. And it's a very interesting discussion at Washington University with a real sincere inquirer. The discussion went on for almost an hour after an evening program, where he comes from another tradition and he's concerned about breaching the confidence that he has in his tradition while exploring something else and how to handle that. So the focus of the discussion was on sound. It's not a matter of, you got to believe. It's not a matter like that, where the dictionary definition of religion is a system of beliefs or a belief in something. If you believe in something, that's your religion. You can be, a believer in witches and have that belief. That's become popular in following Harry Potter and all those other genre of literatures. I forget what they call them, somethings. Witch worshippers or something. Anyway, so that's a religion. According to the dictionary definition, people have belief in that. So sound vibration isn't dependent upon you believe it. Sound vibration acts. It acts more effectively when consciousness is more elevated, less effectively when consciousness is more covered, and specifically also the sincerity of the individual wanting to know. So I said, that's all you have to do, just listen and want to know. And consider not isms, but consider the principles that the sound vibration is conveying. And it will help you become a better, whatever you are, whatever ism, through, if it's genuine spiritual sound vibration. Anyway, Kapila Dev is now saying, these are the persons who should hear this sound vibration, or will most effectively understand it. Starting with text 41, and this is going to end the chapter, and when the chapter is over, there's only one more chapter about Kapila Dev, but it's not so much as teachings, it's the activities of Kapila. There's some teachings, but the activities of Kapila. 9 chapters. He's an important personality amongst the incarnations of the Lord, from the Bhagavatam perspective. Okay, text 41. Instruction should be given to the faithful devotee, Shraddhayanaya Bhaktaya, who is respectful to the spiritual master, non-envious, friendly to all kinds of living entities, and eager to render service with faith and sincerity. No purport. Text 42, it has a nice purport. This instruction should be imparted by the spiritual master to persons who have taken the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be more dear than anything, who are not envious of anyone, who are perfectly cleansed, and who have developed detachment for that which is outside the purview of Krishna consciousness. Jata Vairagaya, detachment. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the beginning, no one can be elevated to the highest stage of devotional service. Here, bhakta means one who does not hesitate to accept reformatory processes for becoming a bhakta. Just stop on that sentence for a moment. Because this is ISKCON 50 celebration time, over and over and over, the 7 purposes of ISKCON have been heard and reviewed and spoken about. So the first purpose of ISKCON is captured in this sentence: to systematically propagate the science of Krishna consciousness and to teach people the techniques, spiritual practices of this process in order to awaken within them the higher purpose of life and thus check the imbalance of values within society in general and thus bring peace to the world. It's a pretty big purpose. But the method is the means of achieving the purpose. Very similar to Prabhupada considering when he first arrived at Boston Harbor and how is this going to be possible? But faith, you say it so many times with, big bold letters, faith in hearing the message of Srimad Bhagavatam and faith in people hearing the holy name, faith in that sound vibration to elevate mission impossible to possible. And lo and behold, the sound vibration from one who has such faith conveys potency. Even when faith is weak, it conveys potency, what to speak of when faith is very strong. Here, bhakta means one who does not hesitate to accept the reformatory processes for becoming a bhakta. Hearing. In order to become a devotee of the Lord, one has to accept a spiritual master and inquire from him about how to progress in devotional service. To serve a devotee, to chant the holy name according to a certain counting method, to worship the deity, to hear Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita from a realized person, and to live in a sacred place where devotional service is not disturbed, are the first out of 64 devotional activities for making progress in devotional service. One who has accepted these 5 chief activities is called the devotee. Paragraph. One must be prepared to offer the necessary respect and honor to the spiritual master. He should not be unnecessarily envious of his God brothers with a capital G. He should not be unnecessarily envious. Whoops, I said that. Rather, if a God brother is more enlightened and advanced in Krishna consciousness, one should accept him as almost equal to the spiritual master and should be happy to see such God brothers advance in Krishna consciousness. A devotee should always be very kind to the general public in instructing Krishna consciousness because that is the only solution for getting out of the clutches of Maya. That is really humanitarian work, for it is the way to show mercy to other people who need it very badly. The word Shushusha Virataya indicates a person who faithfully engages in serving the spiritual master. One should give personal service and all kinds of comforts to the spiritual master. A devotee who does so is also a bona fide candidate for taking this instruction. The word Mahir Jata Vairagaya means a person who has developed detachment from external and internal material propensities. Not only is he detached from activities which are not connected to Krishna consciousness, but he should be internally averse to the material way of life. Such a person must be non-envious and should think of the welfare of all living entities, not only the human beings, but living entities other than human beings. The word shuchaya, shuchaye, means one who is cleansed both externally and internally. To become actually cleansed externally and internally, one should chant the holy name of the Lord Hare Krishna or Vishnu constantly. Final paragraph. The word diyatam means that knowledge of Krishna consciousness should be offered by the spiritual master. The spiritual master must not accept a disciple who is not qualified, semicolon. He should not be professional and should not accept disciples for monetary gains. The bona fide spiritual master must see the bona fide qualities of a person whom he is going to initiate. An unworthy person should not be initiated. The spiritual master should train his disciple in such a way so that in the future only the Supreme Personality of Godhead will be the dearmost goal of his life. And final paragraph. In these two verses, the qualities of a devotee are fully explained. One who has actually developed all the qualities listed in these verses is already elevated to the post of a devotee. If one has not developed all these qualities, he still has to fulfill these conditions in order to become a perfect devotee. And then the final verse without purport ends the chapter. Anyone who once meditates upon me with faith and affection, who hears and chants about me, surely goes back home, back to Godhead. A.T. Padavim, he attains my abode. A.T. Padavim Chame. He, A.T. Padavim Chame. He certainly attains my abode. So that's all you have to do, right? Just once. Meditate upon Lord Kapila Dev, or the personality of Godhead, with faith and affection. And then, who hears and chants about me. Similar to the statement in the 12th chapter Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna asks Krishna for verification, practically for the third time. Which is better? Which do you consider to be better? One who worships the personal or the impersonal feature of the Supreme? And Krishna says worship of the personal feature of the Supreme is by far better, and gives his reasons why. And then describes what that worship of the Supreme, two things, mind and intelligence. Mind, always engaged in thinking of Krishna, and intelligence engaged in serving him, how to please the personality of Godhead through our activities. One who always does that, surely he will come to me. He'll say something to that effect. He'll be with me. He'll come to me. He's already with me. And then if one can't do that, then following the regulations, one will develop a desire to come to that stage, to attain to Krishna. So the regulations of bhakti bring one to that position, which is being said. And the regulations of bhakti need to be done for progress in a qualitative way, under guidance, with the desire to serve and please those who are guiding, and that's pleasing to Krishna. So then the qualities being mentioned become one's decorations. Same message, just expanded. In 8 chapters. Without using the labels of sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, prema bhakti, as Rupa Goswami has done in Nectar of Devotion, these elements or stages of bhakti are clear, both in the verses, and certainly Prabhupada has helped us understand in the purport. Very nice. In the beginning, one can't be a devotee. So forget it. But if one is not yet a devotee, then there's a way to help one become a devotee. And that's hearing, spiritual sound vibration, instructions of Krishna and Krishna's name. And then from that, Shravanam comes Kirtanam, and then Vishnu Smaranam, and then the other processes. But they start from Shravanam. And the Shravanam part starts with Sadhu Sangha, going back to chapter 25. So we should have Sadhu Sangha for the purpose of awakening attraction for Krishna as something that helps us begin and will help us continue as we progress. If there's a problem when the modes of nature get involved. And gee, who is free from the modes of nature? So the modes of nature, the language used by Kapila Dev, not in this chapter, it's chapter 29, but references made in the summary section to chapter 29. The language that's used is bina, binadrik, binadarshana, bina. Bina means separate, like, the 8 material energies. Bina prakriti, ashtada. Bina means separate. So Prabhupada translates that section as separatist. And in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songs, he naturally refers to the scripture without necessarily saying verse and chapter. That's an obstacle. By, in a category rather than the detail, it's a category of the mode of ignorance separatist and the mode of passion separatist. The mode of passion separatist is very prevalent, where the interest of the Supreme Lord and the interest of myself are not the same. And I'm practicing bhakti. The modes of nature influencing that which is influencing consciousness of one who is practicing bhakti. So the language that Prabhupada has presented is one must come to the stage where there's no other interest. Madgatena antaratmana, or bhaktir avyabhicharini, these various terms in the Bhagavad Gita that indicate undivided devotion. So the separatist is divided. I call it the 2-pocket program. So much for Krishna, so much for me. So much for Krishna, so much for me. Me, Krishna, Krishna. And we have to come to the stage where it's only for Krishna. So that takes purification. And it takes a desire, important, it takes a desire for purification. Not you're a bad person because the mode of passion is operating. It's just you're not purified yet, and so the mode of goodness is for purification's sake. And transcendence, this fourth characteristic, is there's nothing else. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. Not even for purification's sake, or I'm doing because I ought to do it. For purification's sake. Because it's in Krishna's interest. It's what, in Krishna's interest is the well-being of his part and parcel living entity. It's my self-interest. But not te vidu svartakatimi Vishnu. Persons don't know their self-interest, and so they have to hear from the Supreme Lord and the transparent sound vibration of the Bhagavatam that gives the Supreme Lord's interest for us. And when we're in the mixed with the modes position, striving, anushilana, striving for that standard. Not becoming miserable because we're not at that standard, or continuing because, well, hey, what to do because the mode of passion is operating and I have separate interests. Acknowledgement and then desiring to go the next step. Very simple. Purification. Motivation. I want to become free from this separate mentality. And this spills over to not only myself and what I do with my life, it's then the expanding circle is how I deal with my family members and, keep going. The community that I regularly mix with, and the people that in general, and then all living entities. I've grown to become fond a little bit of a quote from Albert Einstein. He wasn't, Bach to Albert, but he had some insight, and it's on a presentation on compassion. But Albert Einstein said, something to the effect, one must come to the stage of compassion, or strive to come to the state, one must come to the stage of compassion, where that compassion goes to not only all living entities, but the whole of the universe. And then one can think clearly. That's pretty big compassion. But if we can't think beyond, selfishness, we're not going to think clearly. Even as devotees, nice devotees, but not think clearly. So the bar is a high bar, but so we go in steps according to where we are. No separate interest besides the interest of the Supreme Lord. And as mentioned here, the dear servitors of the Supreme Lord. Specifically, he's using the language of spiritual master, but that those of you that have taken the disciple course understand it's not just the Diksha Guru. That culture, someone has recently brought this to my attention. I don't think he took the disciple course yet. But the culture within ISKCON has become the Diksha Guru means the spiritual master, and the spiritual master means the Diksha Guru. The disciple course doesn't say that, and it, very clearly expresses to the contrary, as said here. Even Prabhupada is saying it. The God brothers of the spiritual master who have become elevated, they are to be seen in that way too. practically on the same level. That's Prabhupada's, I could read it again, but you heard it. It's so that regard should be extended. It's not different. It's not, well, perhaps maybe. These are instructions right in the purports. It's there in the disciple course, it's there in the purports, and still we go forward with the spiritual master means Diksha Guru. So we just hear it again and hear it again and hear it again. And eventually, maybe the light will go on. It's this principle of sadhu sangha is not just those that are on the Uttama Adhikari platform or the Diksha Gurus within ISKCON. Anyway, it's explicit, and these are qualifications necessary to realize the message that Kapila Deva is presenting. And there's a number of nice qualities, as Prabhupada has summarized. These two verses are helping us understand comprehensively what are the qualifications of a devotee. And to be a devotee means we have these qualifications. And if we don't have these qualifications, we should develop them. And how do you develop qualifications? That's a good question, a standard question. And the starting point for that is, of course, hearing from those that are qualified. And the fruit of hearing from those that are qualified is striving, coming to the position of striving for, there's one thing only, the personality of Godhead should be pleased. The separatist, the influence of the modes of nature being dissipated by instead that one principle. And when that one principle is there, Krishna Eka Sharana, then the other qualifications become possible. And gradually, Krishna, the decorator of his devotee, decorates his devotee with those qualities. Krishna Eka Sharana. That language is Rupa Goswami's. And Krishna's language, just the language is different, but the principle is the same, is found in chapter 13, texts 8 through 12 of Bhagavad Gita. Avyavachari Bhakti, undivided devotion to Krishna. Mai chananya yogena bhaktir avyabhicharini. Avyabhichari bhakti, undivided devotion. Undivided devotion. And how does one get undivided devotion? By Acharya Upasana, Krishna's language, in that section. Same as what's here. Same as what Rupa Goswami teaches. It's symmetrical, or it's transparently identical. The language may be different, that's fine. The principles don't change, because they're universal principles. And again, it doesn't matter what the tradition is. If it's transcendental knowledge coming from the Supreme Personality Godhead, the principles are the same. I'm thinking of this discussion with the WashU student. It's spiritual sound. The effectiveness of spiritual sound is not you're supposed to believe it no matter what. The effectiveness of spiritual sound is you have the inquisitive spirit, I want to know. Turn your receiver on and hear the spiritual sound vibration and something will happen. That's all. I want to know. And so I'll say it again. The first the foremost principle to arise, there may be other things like be clean, as mentioned here, inside, outside, but etc. But the secondary principles of compassion and cleanliness and truthfulness and all those valuable characteristics of the individual are the spiritual substance of them is not there unless this one thing is there. That is to say, it'll come and go. Things of this world come and they go. Therefore they're not substantial. They're insubstantial. They're there like the modes of nature, mode of goodness. Someone is truthful, or someone is kind, or someone is this, or someone is that. And the modes of nature compete in something else. And karma comes in something else. So it's not substantial. It looks like the substantial, but it's not substantial without this one. And this one brings substantial. Krishna Eka Sharanam. Mai Chananya Yogina Bhaktir Avyabhichari. Undivided devotion. And that should be that's the horse that pulls the cart. And the cart has all the other nice qualifications. So if one doesn't have these qualifications, one should develop. And how do you develop? By the one, by the process of hearing. And being clear what the purpose of that process of hearing is, and then on the strength of hearing, then being able to deal with the doshas. The separatist, the Bina Darshana mentality in its various manifestations that we've accumulated over who knows how many lifetimes, not just years, not just this lifetime. Who knows? Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls it ancient prejudices. Our material conditioning for who knows, countless. So it's deep, so we shouldn't be impatient, we should be patient. We shouldn't be unrealistic, we should be realistic. The process takes time. That doesn't mean become lazy or complacent, but be realistic, it takes time. And some of the ancient prejudices are more tenacious than other ones. Some go more quickly, some go more slowly. But they stay with the process faithfully, as is mentioned here, and then, then step by step, continue making step by step. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is he has many wonderful sayings which are lights in my life, and one of them is, progress is a series of small steps in the right direction. You need to know what the right direction is. You need to know what the goal of life is. That's the horse that pulls the cart. But then the qualifications necessary to fully realize and be immersed in all this wonderful treasure of transcendental knowledge takes these qualifications, and it may take some time for these qualifications to come. One just keeps the horse before the cart. Continue to hit your reset button and be very clear what the purpose is when you get confused or whatever, kind of off track because of circumstances that are bewildering and complex. And go on with the process of hearing the spiritual sound vibration faithfully, and wishing, as it's stated here, it's just repeating, to please those persons from whom we're hearing in all respects. And please mean not just gifts, it means your heart, and from your heart what you say and do, and how you say and do, with the spirit of wishing to be pleasing in all respects, which is then pleasing to Krishna, and then more lights go on. Clarity comes, clarity of thought, clarity of speech, clarity of action, clarity of heart. That's our process. That's what he's saying. One last thing. We hear, and from the first canto of the Bhagavatam, that the devotional service in the mode of goodness is preferred to devotional service in the mode of passion, mode of ignorance. The verse that says, wood is better than raw earth, and smoke is better than wood, and fire is better than smoke, indicating the modes of nature. The devotional service in the mode of goodness is better than devotional service in ignorance and passion. But this transcendental, the aspiration for transcendental devotional service is something that should be there in the beginning. We don't really have a clear idea what transcendental devotional service is in the beginning anyway, but at least not being averse or feelings of envy towards that standard and that position, and not falsely pretend that we're there, but aspire for that and continue to aspire for that progressively over extended time, the gradual purification, gradual extended time. We're not disqualified because we're not there yet. We're qualified because we're aspiring under proper guidance for that standard. It's really nice. Our process of bhakti is very nice. And we have the opportunity to assist other people, even in other traditions, to strive for the standard that's within their tradition. Prabhupada did like that. It was really nice at the Rath Yatra yesterday, seeing some girls that are wearing clothes indicating they're not Christian, they're Muslim, sitting there chanting japa. It's really nice. I didn't attend it, but I heard from Anuttama Prabhu 3 times, so it was something that really moved him. One of the persons that spoke at that gala event in Washington, D.C. was a professor of Islam at Harvard Divinity School, who, when he was an undergraduate into Harvard Divinity School, he heard Prabhupada speak. It might have been at MIT, I think that's what Anuttama said, but in this public forum on September 13th in Washington, D.C., he said he went to some function and heard Srila Prabhupada speak, and it impacted him in a very, very significant way to this day. He didn't change his faith or the practice that he's following, but it has been a source of light and illumination for him and inspiration for him within his tradition. We're not interested in having people give up their isms. We're interested in having them hear message of transcendence. And it's going to strike different hearts in different ways. But hear message of transcendence and awaken that spirit. It's the most powerful thing. And as Prabhupada is saying here, it's the best gift. So the Sankirtan movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is a natural byproduct of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Not in a conversion spirit, but in a having received something, giving that something that one has received spirit. That's the Sankirtan movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay. Any comments or discussion? Yes.
Guru Maharaj, like when we come across the other faith, they're telling us that we need to encourage following their faith. But when they're trying to follow their faith, like the scripture they're following is like most likely not as it is.
Yes, most likely.
Yeah. So then, how do we encourage?
It's just a beginning. What did Prabhupada do? Are you a Christian? Yes. Do you believe? Do you accept the teachings of Christ? Yes. Did Christ teach, "Thou shalt not kill"? Yes. Then why are you killing? When wet wood is wet, you have to make it dry. So it's not a questionable principle. So, invite them to hold to the principle. Does your scripture speak about praising God's name? Yes. Then I encourage you to praise God's name. So it's not going into the detail. One could go into the detail about, as Prabhupada did with, for example, with Cardinal Daniel Yu about killing animals. But it's on the basis of his own scripture. It's following Krishna's instruction of not disturbing the faith, but holding them according to the faith in what? So it's at least principles. This discussion that I had with this young fellow at WashU, he feels comfortable with the biblical teachings, although he acknowledges, openly and readily, there's many things he doesn't agree with, and many things that have been changed over time. We had some discussion about that. So, while there's fallibility within the teaching, there's principles. So focus on those and do them nicely. And the best way to nourish, the discussion went, the best way to nourish that is spiritual sound vibration. And how it works. It's a principle. Then be a little discriminating where spiritual sound vibration can be found. Where do you go for that? Or where's it going to be filtered and mixed? So find spiritual sound vibration that's not. It's just speaking in principle, not belief and faith. Okay? Anything else?
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. My question is a two-part question, Maharaj.
Your question is?
Two-part question.
Two-part question.
Maharaj, you mentioned Bhakta is one who doesn't hesitate to accept reformatory process. And
I just read Prabhupada's purport, but yes.
I just wanted to clarify my understanding, Maharaj, of the reformatory process. For me, the understanding...
Well, it starts with the regular principles and then other details, like cleanliness and other details.
Is it also the willingness to be more open to hearing the message of...
Sure. But the reformatory processes generally goes to, vidhis, rules and regulations, do's and do nots. Live your life according to vidhis, like, reading newspapers and watching movies and things like that. Vidhis. So it's principle-based, but then there's details and reformatory. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody, and they were saying, putting it simply, I accept the process of bhakti, I accept the teachings that the process of bhakti gives. Making changes in lifestyle habits isn't so easy. That's the reformatory processes. That's the reference. Second?
Second is about qualifications, Maharaj. For me, the challenge seems to be that in order for me to cultivate the qualities or have these qualifications, I understand that when one is at an younger age, it's relatively easier to cultivate.
Wait a second. The problem is what?
When one is at a younger age,
When one is at a younger age,
it's relatively easier to...
relatively easier. Well, you could, take birth again and become young again. And have it easier. But there's no guarantee what's going to happen when you're young. So you take, at whatever point in time the light goes on that says, gee, I have to pay attention to the purpose of life, then you pay attention. And you pay the price for having not had that teaching previously and making foolish choices and having bad habits. Nothing you can do about it. That not easier is nothing you can do about it. This other person who's much older than you have it easier than they do. And yet, at whatever stage, the light goes on that says, gee, this is important. Then we start from there. Easier, not easier. We start from there. You have to work with our situation. That's acceptance. And then progress. Whatever the price is, you pay it. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. You have something? No. Anyone else? Prematrangani has something. So you want to take the microphone back there? Just stay by for receiving it. She's done. Go ahead.
I was trying to frame it, but what I was thinking about is that the essential part really is hearing.
Yes.
And hearing is what really transforms the heart of the person.
Yes, qualitative
And,
hearing,
yeah.
for sure.
And so my thoughts are just going to, for that, so there's education, of course, but then there's a culture that
Yes.
supports the hearing
Yes.
process.
Yes.
And that's when, like, the bhakti can really awaken.
Yes.
My thoughts were going to also the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, first verse, purport, where Prabhupada says, education, culture, devotion, for this to really happen. And sometimes we really seem to find that, the culture seems to be working against the education one is trying to impart so much, like sometimes within our institution or, just some others, or, like varieties of it. And it really feels like a challenge sometimes.
Yes,
Like
it is.
how to, you're educating, but people in general get much more influenced by culture than just the knowledge or education. So what to do?
What to do? Well, there's a term I've been hearing, a fashionable term, cultural engineering. And something on this line, something that I have had discussions with Nutama Prabhu and Konteya Prabhu. Both have very strong conviction in the process of education, making that cultural engineering possible. So there's the obstacle when there's lack of culture, or culture that goes in the opposite direction. Yet, if there's a systematic, exactly purpose number one, systematic, that then reorients the values of an individual or a group of individuals the opposition is the river is moving downstream, and the spiritual culture is to move upstream, and it's not easy to move upstream when the stream is moving downstream. We become culturally defunct, or less capable of receiving, or just not receiving because of that cultural dysfunctionality. So, what to do is the question. Systematic. And systematic training and education means like sadhana, over and over again. Over and over again. Over and over again. So it requires a cultivation of culture over and over again. And the educators may throw their hands up in the air and say, I quit. These students, Kurmarupa Prabhu, for years was, when we served together, he was a Bhakta leader, and then he became the Sankirtan leader of Bhaktas that graduated from the Bhakta program. He did that in New York, and then eventually started the center in Connecticut, Hartford, for like 8 years. And then when he went to Vrindavan, he became a Gurukul teacher, and we spent time together. And he was describing to me what the experience of being a Gurukul teacher is like. He's saying in dealing with bhaktas in the bhakta program, at least you can see them by living with them, literally living with them, and with the Sankirtan devotees similarly living with them, you can see progress. And with children, it's so incrementally slow. It's like you have to be, more patient than I am to stay with the process of being the teacher. But in any case, it's the commitment of the teacher to the student that moves the heart of the student, even it's incrementally slow. Or like parents with children, it's the establishment of character. It's not just a behavior, because the behavior, if it's just a behavior, when the parent isn't there, then the behavior's gone, and it becomes something else, because of the rapid movement of degradation that people are surrounded by, unless it becomes a point of character. So that's a parenting responsibility, and similarly it's an educator's responsibility to be committed to the individual. And obviously, a greater commitment is going to come from the teacher to the student, supposing there's a classroom, common number of in a classroom these days in schools is 25 to 30. If amongst the 25 or 30, one student is particularly interested to learn, then the teacher is going to give more attention to the one that's interested to learn and has affection for the teacher, which helps them learn. This naturally is going to happen. But the teacher doesn't throw in the towel with the other, 29 or 24, because they don't have that same capacity. But then there may be some persons in the classroom that are just troublemakers. They're disruptors. Well, you don't want the disruptor to disrupt the education of the others. So they may be given some warning and even removed from the classroom. So it's the commitment to the individual as an educator. And that the shape of that is going to be according to the educator and the student, or the receiver of knowledge. Murari Chaitanya shared this with me. One of the professions he had before he became a devotee was he was a special ed teacher. And he shared with me, he learned the real problem is not the student's deficiency in learning, it's a problem in the home. So he spent more time in the home with the special ed students to help them get to the point where they can then receive training properly. And taking that model is same with education. What are the roots of someone's life, and how are they influenced in their their day-to-day affective life that then can help produce a greater attentiveness to spiritual culture. You help prepare this presentation so you know how I'm speaking about spiritual wealth. When I go to China, I'm being asked to speak on the topic of spiritual wealth to two groups of wealthy entrepreneurs in China. So this particular point is, it's culture. The wealth, the material wealth is one thing, and spiritual wealth largely in cultures of the world, and China is not an exception, those who have foundational teachings of good character, those persons are the giver of spiritual wealth. And from that spiritual wealth, material prosperity follows. But minus the spiritual, so, and how to ground that spiritual wealth? What our teaching is, Maichananya Yogena. So whatever the difficulty of culture of a person to receive that message, we don't change the message, we just help them with, if you want this, you're going to have to address that. And I'll help you, because I'm committed to you. And it's not easy, because persons are attached to the sources of their misery. It's unnerving for when you care about others that they're attached to their source of misery. And you can point it out to them. I've had this experience many times. You point it out to somebody, and a little resistance, and eventually, yes, you're right, you're very kind, and then wait a while and it's back to the attachment to the source of misery. What to speak of the cultural influences that people are immersed in. Competitive society, for example, that promotes passion, not compassion. It promotes passion, win-lose. So how to cultivate culture in a society that's highly motivated by passion? And then one becomes envious of another because they win, so that means I didn't win, so I lost. Envy. And it's the culture. Whether it's politics or sports or education or service or, it comes into ISKCON because we're part of the macro, we're just a micro of the macro. The modes of nature are operating everywhere. So some individuals need to understand that that whole program is toxic. And I want to become toxic free. Well, easier said than done. But there's principles of how to do that. That's here. And the one has to have teachings and teachers that teach properly in regard for the teachings and the teachers. That's not our culture. Culture is a culture of envy and competition and passion and win-lose. It's a problem. We just stay with the principle and have faith in the principle. Exactly as our founder Acharya did. We just follow in his giant footsteps to our capacity. Okay, I'm going to end here. Thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai.